I'm happy to be here. I teach a course on gender and development in Anand. I've just finished teaching over there. And I've also just come back from a really huge watershed event. It was actually called Watershed, Replenishing Our Earth at the Vatican in Rome, which was blessed by the Pope and organized by his Pontifical Council as well as the Club of Rome. So the Club of Rome, the Pontifical Council, is very interested in what can we do around water with children and youth, and how can we enthuse our young leaders to be not just water managers, but water managers with a twist, or a water manager plus having some ethics, having some values, thinking about culture and art and how all of that intersects with water, as well as the science, the climate part of it, hydrology and governance issues as well. So really, it was a good time to be there and celebrate World Water Day with the Pope and a pretty number of high-level people. So Leena Srivastava asked me to do a talk for you because I happen to be in Delhi. I'm totally unprepared for this. I mean, I'm just going to talk through some slides for you, and also a presentation that WaterAid, I'm on their board, had put together. And unfortunately, I couldn't do the WaterAid presentation in Rome because we didn't have much time. So I'm going to share some of that with you. At any point, if any of you want to ask questions, raise your hand, have some clarifications, you're more than welcome to. Okay? This is basically a bleak landscape with a desolate-looking little tree standing there. But I use it to say that water is a marker of change at 4 levels: the political, the economic, the social and cultural. And in terms of the political, you have water in competing discourses around how water should be managed. Should we have large dams? Should we have community-based water alternatives? Should we be how should we basically be managing our water resources, particularly also, I think, transboundary water? So that's where you have the political context. The economic is the whole debate around whether water should be priced, should it be available free, the whole debate around a human right to water, the increasing commodification and marketization of water as well. So that's your whole economic debate. And then the social is about the workload that women particularly spend in collecting water and storing it and ensuring that it's clean. And also sanitation and all sorts of other things that I will talk about as well. So there's a whole social dimension around how we interact with water, the beautiful water architecture that we have in India. And then of course there's the cultural dimension: who has access to what water, Dalit communities being excluded from community village water sources, and so on. So, and then the whole purity and pollution debate, particularly right now in India with the cleaning of the Ganga. I did my PhD work on the very first Ganga Action Plan, so you know how old I am, because that was launched in the late 1980s, where I'm sure many of you weren't born, launched by Rajiv Gandhi, and he said that this is a plan not for the water engineers, but for a plan for everyone to participate. And to me, the fundamental question then was, how are people going to participate to clean river which they don't think is impure, which for them is Mother Goddess, Ma Ganga and all. And I worked with the Sankat Mochan temple in Benares for at least 6 months, part of the, very, very close to the Mahant, who's no longer here, but he was a professor at BHU as well. And so I really got to try and understand how, as the anthropologist Mary Douglas says, dirt is matter out of place, and how our understanding of dirt from a Western colonial perspective differs fundamentally from the way that people who bathe in the Ganga or any of our other sacred waterways in India, for them, you know, you can brush aside the dirt which flows on the surface of the Red River and still take a dip and be purified. So, in Gujarat, where I have done most of my work for the last 20 years now, Parabs are there along the side of the road in many places, and anyone can take water from here. There's usually a glass, so you can't, because of the lights, unfortunately, you may not be able to see all the pictures very well. But it was there. I mean, no one's denied drinking water from one of these things, and it's always been there. And I think for those of you who've done field work in any part of India, you know that the first thing you're offered in a house is a glass of water, whether it's clean or salty or is turbid or whatever. Water will be the first thing you're offered. Usually you tend to refuse it because you don't want to get sick. But that's what I do. I'm happy to take the tea, but not the water. But anyway. Arvind Bhai was a folk writer and oral historian who also is based in Gujarat in a district called Surendranagar. And some of his poems that we had a chance to get hold of and translated from Gujarati into English. And I think this is typical. I mean, you will have many stories of women and girls spending their whole time collecting water. You have stories of them not being able to fill the water, coming back home, the pot breaks. What does the girl do? She hangs herself by the rope and so on. So this is part of the landscape. Also in Gujarat, these are the virdas, the shallow wells, which are basically depressions dug in the sand, in the sandy bed of the river, left overnight. And in the morning, people are collecting whatever water collects in this little depression over there. And for me, it was just very strong the way that this elderly woman said that drought lives in our stomach. And last year, and probably also this year, we are going to see drought again manifesting itself. I mentioned earlier the whole argument and discourse around the commodification of water. Well, for poor, water has never been a free good, and particularly for women. Unfortunately, all the hours and time that women spend in collecting water, this whole unpaid care economy, we don't have any way of accounting for this. And if we did, then I think our GDP figures would be quite different. So, yeah, another one there. Children, also, this is also in Gujarat, in an area where they had a big decentralized community project going on, in a project called Khoga in the late 90s, early 2000s. We were evaluating this project, and we saw a lot of children collecting water, particularly girls not going to school. Apart from water collection, I mean, now I don't have those slides here, but again, you would not have been able to see them so well. But there are slides in the conflict areas where children were lowered down these wells to collect water, basically tied to a bucket and lowered. And I think last year, if you remember the drought that we had, particularly in Lathur in Maharashtra, there were images of children being lowered into wells to collect water that was playing out on national TV as well. And the other thing about the wells is that, of course, they're also used as sites for suicide. So water interfaces with so many things for us, and I want to also make a comment about boys and men. These are a couple going to collect water. I also want to make a point about men collecting water, that I think there's an assumption that it is only a female chore. Yes, 70%, 80% of water collection all over is done by women, but a lot of water collection is also done by men. Men typically do not head load water. They will use plastic jerry cans, they will use wheelbarrows, they will use cycles, they will use some form of mechanization or transport to carry water. Also in your upper caste communities, in your Rajput and areas where you have the practice of parda, where women cannot go out to collect water from a public site, men will typically fetch water. Also in times of water scarcity, to avoid conflict, again, because you have to walk further away, again, men will fetch water. So we don't have a lot of gender disaggregated data, but we do have interesting evidence, and a couple of people I know who are based out in Stockholm, and Indian professor and her husband have done a story on men and water collection in India, and that's available on their website on Millennium Stories on Water or something like that it's called. But yeah, so I think there's data that shows that at least 17% of water in India is collected by men, and this will vary according to what state, what context, etc. So there's not only all the drudgery about water collection, there's also the space that it provides for conversations and for catching up on the daily news, etc. And I think when women do this around public stand posts, around the ponds, so it's both. It's the work, it's the suicides that I mentioned, it's the children, but there are also sites for meetings. There are, historically speaking, are step wells, and you have some beautiful step wells here in Delhi. These were also sites where the caravans stopped, where people collected around water to have a conversation. And I wanted to juxtapose that image with the water towers that we see right now, which is again a part of our increasingly urbanized landscape, but also the ways in which we are collecting, storing, and distributing water. So we're looking at vertical infrastructure, vertical architecture, instead of horizontal spaces, and renovating or recharging community ponds, community-based tanks, etc. And what happens when you have this kind of an infrastructure? I'm sure most of you who are water science students or any water governance students will know that where the tower is located, how the distribution works, does the water reach the Dalit Basti located usually at the tail end of the village, and so on, who maintains these, who pays for this water, how is it priced, etc. So interesting technology shifts from, and this is happening not just in the water space, it's also happening around housing. And China is a big example of this, where you've been moving rural communities into urban, all this urban development that China's had, tremendous urbanization, but moving people from horizontal relationships, which they enjoyed in a village or a peri-urban context, suddenly living in these ugly blocks and tower blocks and all, and that I think is something that you're seeing in the context of water technology as well. And of course very energy intensive with pumping of this type of water. So now I'm going to split from giving you a little background and context to what I've been working on, what I've been doing, to really some sort of data which some of you have, some of you may not have. I don't know how many of you, are you all water students here, more or less? Oh, only 2 of you are. Okay. So you know that you've all heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think it's goal number 6 on water and sanitation. And these Sustainable Development Goals were launched in 2015. They were a process like the Millennium Development Goals, but now we have, I think, 17 goals and some 200 plus indicators. So for the first time, we have a separate goal on water and sanitation. We think that in India that most people have access to drinking water, but at least if you 75.8 million Indians, that's like what, 50% of the population do not have access to safe water. More than 50% of the population in India defecate outdoors, open defecation. That is the highest in the world. We'll come to that in a minute. We lose a lot of our GDP, I mentioned earlier, not only because people are falling sick drinking unsafe water and therefore losing man days or people days of work, but also because of the time that is spent in water collection. So what is near is 500 meters from the household, from the house. And I think now in the new water security framework, the aim of the government is to provide water within houses to everyone. That's the sort of goal that we'd like to see. So not only is there an issue about access and availability, there's also an issue of water quality. And from an equity lens, it's of course the women who are fetching water from pretty unsanitary sources at times. We had large epidemics earlier around guinea worms in our step wells in Rajasthan, if I remember. That was a big issue. Don't hear about that so much these days. So if you look at, I don't know whether you can see all of this, but the green one is for 2011, and the purple bar is 2001, and this is access to drinking water within homes and outside homes. And you can see that between 2011 to, oh sorry, there is a pointer here, right? So between, this is the 2011 bar and this is 2001, not much change within household access to water. And even outside, between 2001, actually I think it's even come down because more people obviously have water within the homes, but still this hasn't changed significantly. And this are data is in what now? Percentage data, yeah. So I already mentioned that women bear the burden of water collection. If you want some data on that, it's an average of 5 kilometers a day, carrying up to 15 liters of water in every trip. Of course, these are averages. I mean, sometimes it could be more, it could be less. And there is all the incidences about health problems, backaches. I've had women showing me bald patches on the top of their heads where they've been carrying these matkas and all. Backaches are not uncommon. I think what's interesting also for you to understand from a equity and a gender lens is that not all women bear the burden of water collection. It varies according to caste. If you're from a wealthy family in a village, if you're from a middle or a large farming household, you will have other people fetching water for you. If you're an older woman, if you're a mother-in-law or a grandmother, that task of water collection has been passed on by you to your daughter-in-law. Okay? So it's not that when you think about women and when you think about men, don't think about them as homogeneous categories. There's differentiation according to caste and class and age and physical ability as well. Okay? And we know this that a lot, sometimes I've had men in interviews telling me that in a focus group discussion, oh, but we've married her to fetch the water and, you know, if it's not her, it's her or something like that. So these are not uncommon quotes. But increasingly, a lot of girls, you've seen these stories in the media, young girls are not marrying into homes where there are no toilets. Okay? So, the fact that access to water, of course, affects retention rates in schools, and particularly adolescent girls, because there are no facilities, and when a girl starts to have her menstruation, we'll come to that in a minute. But also in terms of the maternal death rate. India, in the region in South Asia, our maternal mortality rate has improved considerably since independence, but it is one of the highest in the region. I mean, even Bangladesh and countries like Bangladesh, Nepal and Sri Lanka are doing better than us, and that is largely to do with the unsanitary conditions in which women are forced to give birth in so many parts of India. And the fact that India has the largest number of malnourished children in the world, like 41%. Partly to do with the size of our population, there's no doubt about that, but it is not an indicator that we should feel proud about. So however you want to measure malnourishment, whether it is stunting or wastage or height-related indicators, we figure, we are the largest percentage. So this link between clean water, nutrition, and sanitation is very much now a part of the policy focus. It has, particularly with the current government, I'll talk a bit about Swachh in the next few slides, but it is something that people are beginning to think. There is not enough evidence to say that if you have, a toilet facility in your house and you have access to a reasonably diversified diet, the minimum number of calories, etc., would your health improve? Would you have less of a chance of diarrheal infection, etc.? So we don't have the data to fully justify all of this, but we know that that is where the trends are going right now. So WaterAid, for those of you who know a little bit about the water sector, WaterAid is the largest sort of non-government organization in India. It was set up in England as a non-profit company, and till last year the India office was a liaison office. But we have, I think, about 7 or 8 WaterAids around the world, in Canada, the US, in Australia and all. And India is the first non-developed or non-white country to make WaterAid an independent entity. Okay, so we're very proud of that, and we did that last year. It's a non-profit company working, I'll come to that in a bit, but WaterAid also works with this whole thing, working through partners, implementing some programs on its own, but basically also trying to do a lot of monitoring and trying to collect gender disaggregated data. Because unless you have data from a policy perspective, no one is going to change anything. You have to make your evidence visible, and the only thing that policymakers like to see is data, and data at scale. So not just some anecdotal case studies about the poor bleeding hearts in rural India, but they want to see things on scale, and they want to see hard quantitative analysis. Good quantitative analysis supported by qualitative analysis is also very important. And what WaterAid and many of the organizations that work in WaSH is Water, Sanitation and Hygiene, many of these actors are now making these links between water, food security, nutrition, health and education. Otherwise you end up working in silos around water, silos around agriculture and health and so on. So it's good to see that these different sectors in India are now beginning to talk to each other. It's good to see that there's a lot of networking and alliances and coalitions being formed across different sectors. So we work in 11 states, largely across this middle belt of India, UP, MP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Orissa, and all in the south in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana and Karnataka. And of course the capital, Delhi. The head office is here. Don't work all over India. We don't have projects in Gujarat and Maharashtra, for example, but this is the large chunk where WaterAid currently operates. And it's been around now for the last 30 years, been independent only for the last 1 year. I want to say a little bit about sanitation as well, because you've all heard of the Swachh Bharat program. And from an equity lens, what happens with sanitation is that you typically have a subsidy-driven program, and not everyone has access to that. You typically have one design, whereas what you need are toilets that are designed differently for differently abled people, for children, for the elderly, etc. We have a whole debate going around in the country on missing toilets. So how much of this data you can read, I don't know, but so like what, 29 lakh toilets have already been constructed. The target is 6.6 million in urban India, 110 million in rural India, and so many lakhs of toilets have been built. I'm not going to go around reading all these figures. The problem with this data is that for people who have gone into villages to see what has been constructed, they are not there. Okay? So similarly, as we had Amartya Sen talking about missing women, at one point that was a big headline. How many missing women are there in India because of practices of infanticide and feticide and everything else that was happening under the banner of gender discrimination. We now have everyone talking about missing toilets. So The main challenge for us with sanitation is that it is easy to build toilets, it's much harder to have people using toilets. And the whole behavioral change component around that is not a part of programming which gets adequate funding. And everyone wants to see the hardware installed, but you know and we know that you go to schools in villages and the toilet is locked, and girls, if they want to use the toilet, have to ask the school teacher, and that to me is a crime actually, that you can't use a toilet that is there. So unfortunately, even with CSR funding, the corporate social responsibility funding, which a lot of it has been coming to the wash sector, even with that, we're not finding that the corporate sector wants to give money into behavioral change. We're happy to have toilets built. So this, you all know, this was done for them. So the other thing is about menstruation, another topic that is now being spoken about quite openly in India amongst the youth. It's coming up. You can see it in the media, you can see it on social media. Girls are speaking up. I was teaching, as I mentioned to you, in Anand and Irma, and I had girls coming to me and saying, you know, ma'am, we've got our periods, can we sit at the back of the class, or can I go back to the hostel to get some pads, etc. These were not things that girls would have asked you as a teacher 15 years ago. So things are changing, but it is a taboo subject. We know that girls are isolated. Young women are isolated not only during their menstruation period but also during pregnancy. They are denied nutritious food that they should be eating at that time because of cultural practices. We know that women have been fighting campaigns in temples to access temples and mosques during this time. But I think more and more that the fact that people are speaking about it, the fact that we have a lot of low-cost alternatives in terms of sanitary pads, in terms of disposal services, etc., available now, that's a big, big, big difference. And this whole thing about puberty and adolescence and menstruation is one of the reasons that so many girls drop out from secondary school and from high school. So WaterAid is doing a lot of good work in this area. It's trying to work. The government of India recently came out with menstrual health management guidelines for schools and offices and the workplace. I mean, the most important thing to me is that even in a university like TERI, you have to have dustbins in toilets. I think that's the most important thing. But there are now national guidelines on what offices and schools and public health places, etc., are meant to do. And I think that's good. I think we're one of the few countries that has that. And as I said, a lot of work is being done with young people on this thing, using girls, using social media. You have a Wikipedia. I think there's something called a Menstrupedia as well, that 2 young girls started. So some really good work happening now. Women leading the change, I think, I'm not going to let you bother to read that story. I think the fact that, again, the pictures are not so clear, the fact that we have 30% reservation for women in panchayats, we have that in our Pani water and sanitation committees, the Pani samitis, in rural areas, and sometimes it's 30%, sometimes it's 50%. I think it's good that we have these policy measures, but as much as you have top-down policy, you also need to have the bottom-up capacity building, the spaces for women to talk, for them to challenge patriarchy, for them to develop their action plans. So the self-help groups are good entry points for these things, but then what happens is that you end up being a separate space. So bringing women into Gram Sabhas, bringing them into the Pani Samiti meeting places and having meetings at times that are appropriate, all that is so important. And I think in terms of committees and the work that we did on decentralization in Gujarat and in Maharashtra, we realized that the women were being used on the committees mainly in terms of collecting the user fees for the water infrastructure. So that's partly because women are seen to be more honest and altruistic, and they don't mind doing this, etc., whereas men were fighting about it. So that was one area that you sort of see that happening. But a lot of women themselves, sometimes when they come into positions of power, are not always very participatory or very open. Again, we need more evidence on this. We need to know that when women are on these committees and all, do they make a difference to the way our resources are being managed? Are women more just and equitable about these things because they are women, because they know what the burden of water work is, they nurture life, etc., or do they not think of all those things when they're there? So I think the evidence right now is very, very mixed. There's not enough to categorize it one way or the other, but we do know that having women on panchayats and pani samitis does make a difference in terms of infrastructure at the village level and what is available and what is not. So I want to stop at this point. I want to say that, I want to sum up the three messages that I had in my talk at the Vatican, very simply put. The first is about accounting for all the unpaid work around water that is done in the care economy. And for that, you need to have gender disaggregated data on the time and effort and energy spent on water collection, and not to assume that if you put a hand pump or you put a connection in the house, that automatically that will not be women's work. We know that women's work extends to when you have toilets put in the houses, a lot of their time is also spent in cleaning toilets. And for that they need water again. So thinking about sanitation without adequate water is also a challenge. So the first is about the care economy, making it more visible. The second is that, in India there's been a lot in the media recently about young girls getting raped because they go out for sanitation purposes, and that it's unsafe and all, and therefore we need to build toilets for them. But this is a very simplistic argument. Okay? Rape in India is not going to stop because you build 50 public toilets or whatever. That's not going to happen. It is important that you have toilets. They are there for your dignity, they're there for your privacy, they're there for many other reasons, but they're not there to stop rape and crime of that sort, and that's not going to stop. So I think we have been, unfortunately, I think the water sector, including organizations like WaterAid, got sidetracked into thinking that toilets per se are going to stop all this violence, and that it was not that they thought that, but it was the way it was being represented in the media and the way that everyone jumped on this whole need for public infrastructure. It's very important that the work that we're doing around menstruation, around water security, around sanitation, that we build those partnerships with men and boys. There's a lot of groups right now, men engage, he for she, lots of platforms where men are talking and boys are talking about these issues as well, and I think that's more important in terms of building the right attitudes around gender and violence, for example. And the third point I want to finish off by saying is coming back to the whole issue of governance, that it is important that we create spaces for women's participation, whether it is through policies, through law, whatever. But we also have to understand that top-down has to work with a bottom-up empowering process, and that only happens when you have organizations that are sensitive to these gender concerns and inequalities that mark the water field. Thank you.